The Mexico City Grand Prix was pretty much a race to turn one, which ended up defining the race results and possibly the championship. There were a few good moments in between, and of course also that fight for second place between Hamilton and the hometown hero of Perez. But first we wanted to ask you, do you think Checo should have pitted immediately after Hamilton to see if they could get the overcut? Cass, I'll now pass it over to you. How'd you score this first half?
This first half was a bit of a tricky one because you had some really good points like Max's masterclass move going into turn 1, but then you also had some low points like a bunch of DNFs, sloppy racing. On the excitement, I was about in the middle because of those massive highs and lows. As well as racing, also scored it in the middle out of 5, just because there were some good moments, but there were also a lot of bad moments as well. You had people colliding, people that were knocked out of the race, but you also had some good overtakes, so it kind of balanced out for me. Drama though, I did have up at an 8 because, I mean, can you blame me? We had 2 DNFs right off the start. You had Valtteri spinning, Daniel essentially ruining his own race, much to my sadness, but then you also had an immediate jump for the lead. I mean, it was very dramatic, but it also kind of fizzled off a bit quickly. We did see some pretty shocking jumps right at the beginning. I think we had Gio move up to P6 and then George up to P9, which was great at first, but then they almost immediately dropped back. I don't know what was going on with Gio today. It kind of feels like it was off to a great start and then just went all wrong for him as he dropped out of the points. Same thing happened to George, so it just seemed like unless you were in that top 4, your race was very unpredictable in terms of where you were going to end up in the points or not. So overall, that puts my first half at a 6.
I'm with you at the same level of excitement. I was at a 5. The highs like you described on that opening lap. You also had the Ocon sandwich that ended up taking place, taking out both Tsunoda and Mick Schumacher. You had a few drivers going wide, and that's sort of related to the kind of racing that we saw in this first half. There was a lot of sloppy moves, like you said. I'm thinking of the battle between Ricciardo and Stroll. They were kind of edging each other off the racetrack. We saw a bit of action with George Russell against a few world champions of Kimi and Fernando. Not working out in his favor though, and as he slowly dropped off, so these overtakes weren't overly dramatic. The other element that caught my eye for my racing score here was Perez was able to keep up with the front runners. Usually we're used to seeing Hamilton and Max just take off, but he was pleasantly keeping up within 2 seconds throughout most of this race. And then also just Valtteri's struggle to try and get past Ricciardo. There was a few openings, but it just never converted into an overtake. So overall, I scored my racing at a 5 as well. And in terms of the drama, just because of that first lap, a few pit stops going incorrectly, I scored it a 7. Overall, when you combine my scores together, it comes out to a 5.6. I'm gonna round that down though to a 5.5. And now, as we moved into the second half of this race, I still had one lingering question in my mind. Should they have pitted Perez right after Hamilton?
Of course, hindsight is a funny thing, but I honestly am not totally sure. I mean, yes, Hamilton was slowed down ever so slightly by Charles Leclerc getting in the way, but it didn't really seem to impact him that much. And especially with Checo initially saying that the tires felt good. They seemed to be improving. Even though Hamilton pitted for new tires, Perez was still relatively on the same pace, so it would make sense for Red Bull to think, hey, let's try going long. But at the same time, you just wonder, had he pitted, could things have gone a little bit differently for him in the end?
They were predicting a 50% chance overtake at that moment, so I don't think it was strong enough for Red Bull to take the bite. And also, who knows? Maybe Perez wouldn't have had the ability to hold off Hamilton in the later stages of this race. Let us know what you think down below. Cass, now, when it comes to scoring the second half, higher, lower, what'd you think?
My scores in the second half were considerably lower because in terms of excitement, racing, drama, and more so lack thereof, there just wasn't all that much going on. A lot of it came down to pit stops. You had drivers like Valtteri just continuing on his string of bad luck, having awful pit stops, and then meanwhile there were others like Lando Norris that came into the pits. His pit stop was only 2.7 seconds, but it felt like ages. I don't know what it was, it just seemed like there wasn't that much action in the second half, which is why I scored my excitement at a 4, because all of my excitement in the second half boiled down to those final 10 or so laps with Perez chasing down Hamilton. But in the end, with back markers getting in the way and Perez not being able to fully close the gap, we just didn't really see that lunge that we were all hoping for, which is why I only scored my racing down at a 3 because nothing else was really happening on track. And then same for drama. Everything was just poor pit stops, fight for P2, and then Ferrari just being really strange, swapping Charles and Sainz, and that was just a weird old mess, but it didn't really contribute much to the total outcome of this race, so that's why I kept my score so low. So overall, that puts my second half score at like a 3.3. I'm gonna bump that down to a 3.25.
In terms of my excitement, I see where you're coming from. I scored it at a 6 just because it was pretty similar to Austin, except the roles were reversed, but the fight was only for P2 this time. I understand it's the hometown hero and all, and it was great to see Checo leading some laps, but overall it was pretty anticlimactic because of the traffic and the turbulent air of this circuit. It's not the best for overtaking, I found out. The racing I did also have relatively low. It was pretty much us just watching the gap for the fight for P2. It was getting pretty close and there was some good moments where he had a chance to pass Hamilton. However, it was mostly due to traffic, and once that got more into the mix, it pretty much ruined any chances for Red Bull to claim second place. There was one nice move though I do want to highlight from our Canadian Lance Stroll. His move on George Russell was very nice, and that's pretty much what gave most of my points. In terms of the drama, I scored it a 4, most likely just because of Valtteri's trying to go for the fastest lap. Max was involved because he had lapped Valtteri and then they had to pit him again just to get him in some open air. Overall, some really funny stuff to watch and see happen, but in the end, it's pretty crucial because now Mercedes are only 1 point ahead of Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. So all in all, when you put my scores together, it comes out to a 4.3. I'm going to bump that up though to a 4.5. So when you combine both of our scores together, the Mexico City Grand Prix comes out to a 4.75. Here's how it compares to the other races so far this season. There are 4 races to go, but there's still so much to play for. But we aren't done just yet. It's time to go to our segment of Driver Watch. We're going to check out one driver's race today. Let's see who we get.
I'm curious to see who we're gonna get because a lot of drivers did not have a great day today, so fingers crossed that we get someone who actually had an interesting race, whether it was good or bad.
So it looks like it's Mick Schumacher. For this reason, we'll quickly go over his race and then do another spin.
Race review, Mick Schumacher. That sucks, man. Try again next time.
Great qualifying. There was potential, but it's a shame he got involved in that crash on that first turn, and that was it. Let's just spin again now.
Pierre Gasly!
Underrated drive today, that's for sure, so it's great to shine some light on his race today, finishing off in P4.
P4. Pierre Gasly P4. He went under the radar today. He barely got any screen time, and that's just because he was out there driving calmly, not under any sort of stress. Obviously not within close enough range that he could put pressure on Perez, but pretty far enough from the Ferraris that they straight up could not catch him today.
He was in a league of his own. It was super impressive. It perhaps is related to the Honda engine being in its own league at this track.
Ultimately, it was really funny to see Ferrari trying to chase him down, swapping around their drivers, saying they're just not quick enough. And honestly, Pierre deserves this. He deserved another good day. He had a great qualifying, stayed clean at the start, and yeah, this is what I've come to pretty much expect from him these days. He's a stellar driver. And I'm excited to see him on the podium again. I'm convinced it's gonna happen.
We're going back to Interlagos next, where he had his first podium in Formula 1. We're looking forward to that race. That's gonna conclude this race review. If you haven't already, be sure to leave this video a like, hit that subscribe button, let us know your thoughts on the Mexico City Grand Prix down below, and we will catch you in our next video.
Bye!